Hello and welcome to the Trading Bell. I'm Nokip Kimboy, and today we are on a cleaning endeavor. Talk about wash. This is commonly or a common term when you're referring to matters money laundering. And also there's another element of terrorism financing, basically illicit flow of money. This is a huge problem, not only on the continent of Africa, but globally. Close to 2 to 5% of the global GDP is illicitly flowing, and that money could change a lot of things. So the question is, what is being done to counter money laundering and also to combat matters terrorism financing? That's why today on the Trading Bell, we have the man himself, head of the Financial Reporting Center, Director General, Captain Retired Saitoti Maika, who will talk to us on this particular issue. Money laundering, quite a big term. But even before we do that, when you talk about Financial Reporting Center, is one of those organizations that are sort of under the radar, but doing the most important work. Bring us up to date. What does FRC do?
I think FRC is a state corporation, which is a body corporate established by the Proceeds of Crime and Anti-Money Laundering Act with the sole mandate of identification of proceeds of crime and combating the financing of terrorism and combating the proliferation financing. So basically, we are the body that is mandated to look at illicit financial flows, identify suspicion, qualify the suspicion, and then disseminate the findings to the relevant law enforcement agencies for further action. In this case, for prosecution purposes, and we do also share with the designated regulatory bodies the findings of our report to address any issues that are probably related to breaches of law that fall within the purview of the respective regulatory authorities.
All right. That's very important because, they say in every market, there's always a madman. And when you talk about financial flows globally, there are those bad elements that play within the system. And your job is to identify them. So when you talk about money laundering, in simple terms, what does that entail?
Money laundering is basically a generic term that refers to conversion of illicit proceeds to licit proceeds through processes. What I mean by this is the process in which illegally acquired proceeds or assets, for that matter, are converted to give them an apparent legal source. So our business is to find out the source of the illegality, address the source, and also address the offense that's prescribed in law.
From a larger scale of things, for example, if somebody is turning their illegally sourced money and they inject it, for example, into the real estate sector and they build houses. Talk to us about the economic impact of that, having illegal money being funneled and channeled and being cleaned and brought into the legal side of things. What are the economic implications of that?
There are quite a number of economic implications. One, looking at the broader picture, is the issue of breaching the law, which anchors literally everything thereafter. And the economic implication, by and large, affects the whole economy, both sectoral and what I'll probably call the national outlook. Because let's look, for example, at the banking sector for that matter, because all of us more or less converge at the bank. Whether you're doing anything else, at the end of the day, there's a banker who has to bank and give safe custody of our incomes. When you have an issue or a situation where illicit proceeds flow into the banks, that in itself distorts a lot of things. One, it gives a false representation of genuine income, which the bankers will receive unknowingly, and that in itself more or less populates or pollutes what the bank already holds as legal income from all of us. And the economic impact of that, it gives a lot of distortion. Because at the end of the day, assuming that a criminal is holding proceeds in Kenya, the moment it becomes unsafe, he'll move the proceeds elsewhere. That itself affects the deposit in the bank. Banks basically trade with our money. So in a situation where there's a rampant or a withdrawal, a huge withdrawal, then that takes away basically what the banks used to trade with. And that itself is distortion. There's a whole impact of also fueling the already existing illegal activity. If it's proceeds from, let's say, drug trafficking, and they're banked, that gives that trafficker a safe haven where he can keep his proceeds and continue safely to engage in that illegal activity.
Quite a number of risks, and that's why when you released the National Risk Assessment on money laundering and terrorism financing, it was very critical to give us an understanding of exactly the progress that we've had. You mentioned earlier on the predicate offences, and quite a number of them. I was just trying to find that particular graph you cited between 2016 and 2019, and the leading one was obtaining these finances obtained under false pretense, as has been going up from 2016 to 2019. Another one, stealing by employee or servant. Somebody has siphoned money, and that is second under predicate offences. Maybe just to zero in on that, for this trend that you're seeing, what is happening? The numbers seem to be going down on employee siphoning, but they're still up there, though dropping a little bit. What measures are being put to tackle like these top two predicate offences?
First, let me put a disclaimer on that, because we don't have a role in regard to dealing with the predicate offences.
Okay.
Ours is to identify money laundering and basically process of crime. But again, that statistics that's drawn from the DCI, and it was to help us understand the risk and context in respect of the national risk assessment. But let me comment about the two which you've mentioned. One is obtaining by
false pretense.
By false pretense. Mm-hmm. And that in itself is fraud in a way. And basically, it revolves around the whole issue of even the wash we're talking about. Somebody proclaiming that I have gold or diamond to sell. At the end of the day, you get into contractual arrangements in which you pay for this gold. It turns out to be wash. There's nothing. It's hot air. Or even by and large, it's fake gold for that matter. This is what basically the whole issue of obtaining by false pretense is involved with. Again, it's just the normal, the whole issue of, we've seen these scams where somebody says, I have this order. This is very common with the purported international NGOs. I have an order to supply this NGO with this kind of goods. You need to deliver these goods. It's quite lucrative. We have the order. If you don't deliver by tomorrow, if you don't deliver by Friday, we are giving someone else that order. Deliver the goods. Monday, you're going for your payment. That office is vacant. So again, these are the kind of offenses that are basically referred to as obtaining by false pretense. Mm-hmm. The second one is theft by servant. Theft by servant is also a very, very wide offense. It's because basically it's a basic offense of you defrauding your own employer. It ranges from the basic domestic setting where somebody takes away your property and that's it, it becomes an offense, even to the level where an employee of a multinational colludes with other persons, either within or without the institution, and carry out fraud against the institution. And that, again, that's also theft by servant. That's a generic charge which is preferred against someone who commits such an offense. And this is basically one area that we looked at among the other offenses, just to try and understand the risks in the country. And out of the prevalence, and based on the statistics provided by DCI, we arrived at that conviction that this is actually the highest, or among the highest offenses that have been reported that generates proceeds. Because at the end of the day, if it's defrauding by an employee, be it in the private or public sector, those are basically proceeds of crime.
Yes.
And we go after those proceeds. If you steal from your employer, whether in public or private, you convert those proceeds into your own use. That's how money laundering happens. So when we are charging you for the offense of stealing by servant, we also go for the proceeds, which are subject to forfeiture or confiscation for that matter, because those are proceeds of crime.
Okay.
Yes.
And I'm glad you clarified the issue of mandate right there. From this NRA that you released, money laundering threats, you classify this as medium in the country, the money laundering threat. Though vulnerability, you said it's high. Clarify for us that disparity.
One, you must first understand that this was a scientific process. There is input and there is output based on a certain methodology, the way you carry out the normal research. And while you're looking at the vulnerabilities and the overall rating as medium and one is high, vulnerabilities emanate out of a certain context. For example, if institutions don't have good corporate governance structures, vulnerabilities exist, but does not necessarily mean that that offense will be committed. When we are looking at the institutions that we regulate for money laundering and terrorism financing, for that matter, we are looking at institutions where there is responsibility that is bestowed on certain persons within that institution. Where, let's say, for example, internal controls are not prescribed as a policy, then we look at vulnerabilities based on such situations. That whereas you have this particular office that is supposed to carry out a certain function, there aren't any prescribed policies or controls for that matter that are probably board approved to provide for that office to function effectively. So that's how we look at the vulnerability. It exists because you have not put in place certain control measures to deal with the vulnerabilities.
Okay.
But again, by and large, when we looked at all those offenses, there is also quantum in terms of what has been generated by the offenses that we have so far prosecuted. And that's how we came up with the whole rating of a medium in terms of money laundering.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you mentioned banks earlier on. You said, they are very central in our financial operability as a country. There are other spaces that we are seeing also being very vulnerable points. There is the issue of real estate, money remittances providers, SACCOs, legal professions, and second-hand car dealers. Maybe starting with this issue of second-hand car dealers. What is the vulnerability? What is the loophole right there that can be taken advantage of?
No, that's one sector that is unregulated, so to speak. When I say unregulated, I'll cite the few other sectors that are regulated. The banks are regulated by Central Bank of Kenya. The insurance sector is regulated by IRA. The security sector is regulated by CMA. The NGO sector is regulated by the NGO Coordination Board. The gaming industry is regulated by the Betting Control and Licensing Board. Who regulates the second-hand motor vehicle dealers? I'll say there's no regulator. It's basically, if you wanted to start one today, a company, you just need to register with the Business Registration Service, and you have a certificate of incorporation. Look for an empty yard, look for a lease, you have capital to import cars, and you're in business. But if you look at how that sector operates, and I don't want to indict them, this is actually the outcome of the NRA. You can comfortably walk into a yard, and if the dealer accepts you to buy in cash, any car you want, a Probox for example, 1.8 million, you'll transact. At the end of the day, when the second-hand motor vehicle dealer walks into a bank, he'll just say, I sold a car, KCF 285T. And it's possible because nothing prohibits that dealer from dealing in cash. It's not an offense to deal in cash in this country. Yes, there is a threshold in terms of reporting, or rather declaring large cash transactions. It's 10,000. The other day, the president upscaled that to 1.5 million, an equivalent of $15,000. So at the end of the day, if let's say it's below the 1.5 million, that is now more or less what is prescribed, then you can bank that money. The bank can decide to ask or not to ask details of that transaction, because all what they're supposed to do is to report what has been already prescribed in law as a reporting threshold. Get back to the dealer. If that dealer wanted to launder on behalf of anybody, and this is possible, or even someone who's probably obtained illicit proceeds, let's say for example, a public servant who gets a commission or a kickback for helping someone get an award of a contract, and he walks into a car dealership and he says, I want to buy this car. And then he changes his mind and tells the guy, by the way, there's $1 million shillings here. You know very well that where I sit, if I deposit this money in the bank account, there are questions that will be asked. Can you just deposit these as sales of your business? Keep 10% of that. How will you know that Saitoti took $1 million shillings to a dealer, and then tomorrow he can buy a car on my behalf? I'll be able to dispose of that car. All what I need to do after I've gotten the car from the dealer is to walk into the bank with a check, or even get a transfer. Questions are asked, I sold a car. Can you provide us with any documentation to support that transaction? I have a logbook, reading my name, KCF 001T. Fair deal. I've already got the money that I wanted. Put that money into something else. I can buy a plot elsewhere, and I've cleaned that money. And that's basically the process of money laundering. It's as simple as that.
Whoa.
So we are looking at gatekeepers, and that's why we are saying that sector is unregulated. And the gatekeepers are the institutions that are mandated in law, or ought to be mandated in law, to ensure that illicit proceeds don't get an easy way into the economy. The reason why banks ask those questions and want clarifications and want documentation to support transactions is just to ensure that illicit proceeds don't get their way into the economy.
Definitely.
For the second-hand motor vehicle dealers, I mean, we are human beings, and everybody is out to make money.
Yes.
Some are out to make money in a bad way, some are out to make money in the right way. So when we say that sector is vulnerable, it's just because of the fact that there isn't enough measures or protective measures for that matter to ensure that they are not abused for money laundering. We are not necessarily saying that they are being abused for money laundering. We are saying that there are vulnerabilities that exist in that sector that create some threats or vulnerabilities for money laundering to happen.
Definitely.
Yes.
And
for the same again, I think
yes.
which other sector you mentioned?
Actually,
the real estate
professions, actually.
Let me talk about the real estate.
Okay.
The real estate sector has a regulator. But looking at the context in which we can refer that to as a regulator, it's a bit wanting. Because the regulator who's supposed to regulate the real estate sector is the Real Estate Agents Registration Board, which is basically, as per the current mandate in law, it only registers those estate agent or realtors for that matter. We have not really put in place strong measures to ensure that that sector is properly regulated for money laundering and terrorism financing. And that's one recommendation that we've given in the National Risk Assessment, to make sure that that body becomes an effective regulator.
Okay, definitely. There is the element of combating corruption, and we've seen efforts from the government, the formation of multi-agency task force by the president on corruption has been very critical in regards to beating corruption. Talk to us the mandate of FRC in that, and so far what's been the outcome as it stands.
The Financial Reporting Center is a member of the multi-agency task force on corruption that was established by His Excellency the President. And the objective of that task force was to bring together all the agencies that have a stake in fighting money laundering and, let's say, corruption, sorry, for that matter. Previously, the efforts was disjointed. But out of the experience we've had trying to work around having a framework that ensures that the agencies work together to effectively combat corruption, the government realized that us not coming together was creating an opportunity for more or less a very, very weak engagement among ourselves in dealing with corruption. We all know that corruption is more prevalent in public procurement. And I say public procurement because government is the biggest spender when it comes to money. And government contracts are largely big procurement processes. Basically at the level of the normal consumables in a government entity to huge projects, roads, construction, etc. We are able to see, or other banks are able to see, because they report to us suspicion, transactions that could be linked to corruption. And when they're filing, the process of filing suspicion with us, there are parameters in which these banks file those reports. We have guidelines on how to identify red flags, and they're able to tell when a transaction has the ingredients of corruption or embezzlement or fraud for that matter. Once they file that, FRC is in a advantage position to inform the other agencies that are responsible for fighting corruption, either DCI or EACC, that we see this person A, who's probably an employee of this institution, receiving certain money from a person who has also received business from this institution. And basically those are the linkages or the red flags that generate reports for us.
Well, thank you very much, DG Financial Reporting Center, Captain Retired Saitoti Maika, for your input and elaborating, making us understand what exactly is happening in countering, money laundering in the country and terrorism financing. We appreciate your time. All right, so there you have it, the ins and out of wash business, the vulnerabilities, and what the country is doing to make sure that we are curbing this challenge. Because in one way or another, when illicit finances is channeled into legal and proper financial streams, it brings distortions that are not right. Well, thank you very much for watching Trading Bell. I'm Nokip Kimboy. I'll leave you with the markets.